Shavua Tov, everyone. Hope you're doing well, that you had a wonderful Shabbat and enjoying the summer. Baruch Hashem. So we're continuing from where we left off 2 weeks ago. Last week was Tisha B'Av. Unfortunately, we weren't zoche to see Binyan Beit HaMikdash in its glory, but hopefully soon, Ezra Hashem, every day we have to be mitzapeh legeula. Every single day we really have to look forward to geula. So we look forward together. And I also at this point want to also say refuah shelema to all those that have been wounded in the attack on Yerushalayim, a terrible, terrible attack, terror attack. And they should all be well, and they should all be, have a refuah shelema bimhira b'yameinu be'ezrat Hashem. Very unfortunate. And we have to pray not only for the refuah of these wonderful Jews who've been wounded, but also for the situation that we're in. These things can't happen. And when they do, it's a message to all of us, for all of Am Yisrael. So 2 weeks ago, we discussed Perek Yud, 10th chapter, which was really an amazing chapter. I think one of the most important chapters in our Ktuvim for sure, because in it we saw that not only did Am Yisrael accept upon themselves a new agreement with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, but we saw the making of Torah Shebe'al Peh transmitted to the people. Up until then, it must have been just in the hands of the rabbis, of the leaders, of Ezra Nechemia, of the kings before them. But here, for the first time, we saw that they accepted the Torah Shebe'al Peh. They accepted the idea of rabbinic decrees, rabbinic mitzvot, as we saw, for instance, Shemitah. There was no obligation to hold Shemitah. That was one of the things that they accepted. Why was there no obligation? Because from the Torah, the only reason to keep Shemitah is when most of Am Yisrael, all of Am Yisrael, depending on which they are, is in Eretz Yisrael. But we know for a fact that most of Am Yisrael are in Bavel and other places. Yet still, Midarabanan, they accepted upon themselves Shemitah, which is very similar to what we have today as well. Shemitah is only Midarabanan. And they accepted a lot of other things. They accepted a Shlishita Shekel, which we saw, we weren't really sure what it meant. We looked at the Gemara a little bit, and we saw that also is rabbinic. And altogether, there were 7 of them that we saw. And it's really an amazing thing to see how it developed. We're now starting Perek Yud Aleph. We're really almost done with the Sefer of Nechemia. Perek Yud Aleph discusses the demograph, Yerushalayim, how it started to expand, and the different cities that the Jews, or different villages, different areas where the Jewish people started to settle around Yerushalayim. That is Yud Aleph. Yud Bet is Chanukat, Chomat Yerushalayim, which they already built, but they finally have the celebrations. And that's really basically what it is. And then at the end, the last Perek Yud Gimel, is the memoirs of Nechemia, the Zichronot, the second half of the Zichronot. We saw the other one previously. So let's jump right in. There's just a couple of psukim that are important to delve into in depth. Most of the psukim are just really names of people, names of cities, but we can learn a lot from the order of things, and from those psukim that are not necessarily names and names of people or cities. We'll see very quickly that there's so much to learn from Nechemia. They were great. Ezra was a great man. Nechemia was a great man. He really was. Someone told me from Shir here, I won't say the name, that they always heard of Ezra. Ezra is something we hear of a lot. We hear Ezra from Ashek Knesset HaGedolah. We hear Ezra like Moshe Rabbeinu, but they didn't really hear much about Nechemia. You know the name because of the book Ezra and Nechemia, but Nechemia always came second to Ezra. That's what this person assumed. And now that we're learning this, we see really 2 different people, characters, 2 different leaders, both just as important. The Gemara, as we discussed, we said the Gemara shows that Ezra was so big, so great, that the Torah could have been given by him. And we really saw last week that Torah Shebe'al Peh definitely was him transmitting and handing it over to Am Yisrael. But Nechemia doesn't fall short from Ezra. He is extremely important, and he's a huge gadol, and one of the, I think, if not one of the greatest leaders we ever had. And it's not yet time for the sikum, for summaries, but it's enough to say that for now. So let's jump right in. Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. Okay, we start with the situation that is, we discussed the agreement that they accepted, and now it's time to populate Yerushalayim, populate the areas beyond. We built a stronghold, we built a fortress of Yerushalayim with the choma, with the wall, and now it's important to fill it with people. So let's read the first pasuk. So the first pasuk goes like this: Vayeshvu sarei ha'am b'Yerushalayim, u'sh'ar ha'am hipilu garolot להביא אחד מן העשרה לשבת בירושלים, עיר הקודש, ותשע הידות בערים. First of all, isn't it nice to read Yerushalayim, עיר הקודש? Text, black and white. Yerushalayim, עיר הקודש. It's not something that we made up. It's not something that we only say today. It's something that was mentioned, Yerushalayim, עיר הקודש, mentioned thousands of years ago, literally thousands of years ago, 2,500 years ago at least, if not before that. Ir HaKodesh, and we are zochet to live in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. What is a zchut? We should really cherish every minute, every moment that we have living here. So the translation of this pasuk is pretty simple. You know, the leaders, they all settled in Yerushalayim, and the rest of the people, Sh'ar ha'am, they drew lots to choose one family out of every 10 to go and live in the holy city of Yerushalayim, while the rest live in the other cities and towns, the villages surrounding Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. So basically, 1 out of every 10 Jews, 10 families in Yehuda, is to move to Yerushalayim. And it wasn't enough, as I started to say, it wasn't enough just to build the city and the walls of a city. It's not enough to ignite the spiritual renewal of the residents of Yerushalayim, accepting Torah shebichtav, accepting Torah shebe'al peh, accepting the rabbinic decrees and the gzeirot that come to help Am Yisrael. We saw last week that all 7 of those rabbinic mitzvot were there to help Am Yisrael settle properly, help them ben ish lechavero. That's important. So now, now they have to make sure that Yerushalayim is populated, right? Because for a city to prosper and to be great, it must be populated. And that's important. And we know that also from 1948, even before 1948, we saw that one of the important parts of Zionism as tzionut, as we know it, there were many different types of tzionut, right? There's intellectual tzionut, echad ha'am, there was ma'asit, actual practical Zionism, there was Herzl, etc. So we see that what basically won at the end was practical Zionism, coming to Eretz Israel and building yeshuvim and building cities and just using your hands to build. And that's what Nechemia now feels that he needs to do. He needs to populate Yerushalayim to be able to have facts on the ground. It's not enough just to have a beautiful city, a walled city, a secure city. We need facts on the ground, and that is people, human beings, right? So it's interesting also that I noticed something very, very interesting in the course of the history of Am Yisrael. For the duration of 70 years after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Yerushalayim basically had been nothing but a ghost town. That's really what Yerushalayim was. It was nothing. It was empty. It was desolate, in ruins. And then Zerubbabel and the others from Shavei Tzion, they came back to Yerushalayim. And then over the next 80 years after that, around 80 years or so, give or take, we saw that when we looked at the timeline. So after about 80 years, during those 80 years, they started to repopulate Yerushalayim with a new Beit Mikdash built, and now we have the walls of Yerushalayim rebuilt. But the city still needed more people. They still needed more people. So I noticed something very interesting. During the first Beit Mikdash, the time of the Beit HaMikdash, dating back to when Shlomo HaMelech built it, of 900, a little bit, 950 BCE, and also the city of David, Ir David. So if you notice, Yerushalayim, Ir David, basically was conquered and built only in the final stages of Kibush Haaretz, capturing the settlements of all the Shvatim of Israel. And the last thing that was built, literally the last things that were built, as we say in Makkah Patish, was the Beit HaMikdash. After the Beit HaMikdash was built by Shlomo HaMelech, which is about 480 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt, that's when Shlomo, finished Kibush Haaretz by building Beit HaMikdash, right? Yoshua comes in, and he starts conquering Yericho and then the Ai, and he starts, conquering all of Eretz Israel. Of course, he didn't finish the job, and Am Yisrael rebelled, and they didn't finish the job, and then, of course, they were influenced by the nations that were here, and then we get the Sefer Shoftim, which is Echta ve'ashuv, we sin, and then Hashem sends a terrible taskmaster to come and to enslave us, and then we can't then we zoek to Hashem, we daven to Hashem, we pray to Hashem, Hashem sends us a leader, a shofet, and then we chozer b'tshuva, and then we succeed in conquering, and then again we sin, and then the cycle goes on and on, 12 or so times, a bit more, and until we get to Sefer Shmuel, and then Hashem sends us another leader, Shmuel and Avi, and then all this time we are capturing more and more of Eretz Israel, losing some of the areas, recapturing some of the areas. But finally, when Shaul comes, David HaMelech, he succeeds in capturing everything, almost everything. He captures Yevus, Ir David, and that's going to be the place of the Beit HaMikdash. But he wasn't Zocher. He wasn't lucky enough to build the Beit HaMikdash. His son Shlomo was the lucky one, and he built the Beit HaMikdash. And when he literally hit the nail on with the hammer, the last nail into the Beit HaMikdash, that's it. Kibush Haaretz was completely done, and we never had Eretz Yisrael the way we had during the time of Shlomo HaMelech, territory-wise. So the last thing was Yerushalayim, and then Beit HaMikdash. So having said that, it's interesting that during the second Beit HaMikdash period, it was exact opposite. The return to Yerushalayim was the first stage, followed by the construction of the Beit HaMikdash. And then only after that, now Ezra and Nechemia want to start populating Yerushalayim and the areas around. So it's the exact opposite of what happened then. It's very, very interesting. And the reason is because once Shlomo HaMelech created the Beit HaMikdash, and that became the Merkaz HaRuchani, the most important spiritual center for Am Yisrael, then the Kedusha never left. As the Rambam says, the Kedusha never left Har HaBayit. Even today, he claimed then that even then, in his day, about 1,000 years after the destruction, the Kedusha never left the Beit HaMikdash area, Har HaBayit area, because once Hashem was Shochen, Sham, he's always there. So it's interesting how now the exact opposite. We first build Yerushalayim in Beit HaMikdash, or really first we come to Yerushalayim, build the Beit HaMikdash, conquer Yerushalayim, build a wall around it, and now we can start going outward instead of going inward. It's a whole different approach to Eretz Israel. Right, Zerubbabel and Ezra, especially Nechemia, when they immigrated and they came mainly to rebuild Yerushalayim, and only afterwards to restore the walls and the gates. And after that, the Jewish people signed an agreement, which we studied about 2 weeks ago before Tisha B'Av, and only then were people ready to commit to the human ma'aser that we just said here, right? That every one family out of 10 families we're now going to move into Yerushalayim, to the inner walls of Yerushalayim, according to this raffle, this lottery that Nechemia decided to bring on Am Yisrael, right? So 1 out of every 10 are to live in Yerushalayim, the holy city, Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. I think also it's interesting to note that Nechemia also knew the bigger the population of Yerushalayim, the greater the resources for defense and strength in battle, right? He knew that you needed a lot of people in Snide, not just to repopulate, not just to grow, but also for security-wise, right? He didn't rebuild the walls just to see some, conquering army come and break them down again, right? He didn't want, because that's what Sanballat and Geshem Ma'amoni and Tuvia, that's what they really wanted to do. We see that they never stopped. During this whole entire time, they're out there, they're watching us like hawks, waiting for us to make a mistake, waiting for their time to just go in. Just like, unfortunately, this terror, murderous Arab animal who was just waiting, lurking, hoping to get a jump on Jewish souls. Also, I want to also make a note. Please note that the first 4 words of the pasuk teach us a lot about leadership. The first 4 words: Vayeshvu sarei ha'am b'Yerushalayim. The leaders of the Jewish people set the example by living in Yerushalayim. We said that there's a raffle, lottery, 1 out of every 10 families. But the leaders, they lived in Yerushalayim. And make no mistake, living inside the walls of Yerushalayim was much harder than living outside. And I'll explain in a minute, though it might be more secure, but from every other point of view, it's not as glamorous as it is living outside. So in a way, these leaders felt that they had no right to expect the people to live in Yerushalayim if they themselves were not living there. So the people were asked to submit themselves to a lottery system, where 1 out of 10 would be selected to move from the surrounding regions into the walled city of Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. I think it's important to say Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh so it seeps in. So in the end, at least 10%, think about just regular math, 10% of Yehuda's population would basically live in Yerushalayim. That's pretty amazing. Now, not only that, but there's a lot more. There were people who volunteered, right? We have the second half in Pasuk Bet, people who volunteered to move into the walled city. They didn't have to. They volunteered. They didn't have to. They weren't part of the raffle. They were extras. They were people who wanted the pioneers, right? And because of that, they were blessed by the citizens of Yerushalayim. So let's read Pasuk Bet. Vayivarichu ha'am. They didn't bless those who were selected by the lottery. Vayivarichu ha'am lechol ha'anashim hamitnadvim lashevet b'Yerushalayim. They praised anyone else who volunteered to live in Yerushalayim. Vayivarichu ha'am lechol ha'anashim hamitnadvim lashevet b'Yerushalayim. So apart from the leaders who had a special obligation as a leader, and those selected in the lottery who were also obligated because of the lottery, there were men who were willingly offered themselves to live in Yerushalayim. And these men and women and families, they were blessed. Now, they were blessed. I said I'll explain why. They were blessed because obviously it was a challenge, a very big challenge of theirs to live in Yerushalayim. Number 1, because they had to reorder their view of material things, right? Because think about it. They had to give up land in their previous region and take up new business in Yerushalayim. Think about it. You have a beautiful house in the village somewhere, and you're milking your cow, or you have your crops. And now all of a sudden you have to enter a walled city, and you don't have that much land anymore. People were living, cozily one with the other, like we have in Yerushalayim here. And you have to give up that big house, and you have to give up maybe your previous business. There's no huge lands of crops anymore. So you have to find a way to sustain yourself, being creative. And I think, amazing, I think that's also one of the challenges Jews living abroad today have as well. Giving up their big homes, giving up their backyards. Just a couple of days ago, I met somebody who came to shul, and we struck up a nice conversation. And he told me that he's thinking of making aliyah, and he said he would like to buy a nice house with a very big backyard for his kids. I said, well, that's very nice, but It's very difficult to do that here in Yerushalayim. And even if you had the funds and you had the ability to, it's hard to find an actual house that looks like that has a big backyard. You might have to move out, outside of Yerushalayim to one of the nachaluyot, etc. And that's something that you have to decide if you want to do. And then he asked me, well, are there Arabs there? Is it dangerous? I said, living in Eretz Israel is a question of emunah. But of course, there's some places, some areas that are more dangerous and some that are not. But look what happened just early this morning. We think that we're secure, but it could happen anywhere. Anyway, so they have to give up their backyards, 2 cars. It's not easy once you get used to that kind of a life. And many times, coming to Israel means finding a job that might not be exactly what you want or what you're trained for, right? Although, Baruch Hashem, today we have a lot of advanced technologies, and it's easy to continue working for American and British companies in Israel. And I'll tell you a story that my father-in-law told me. My father-in-law, Tira's father, I call him Abba. He's my father as well, in many, many ways. And he basically said that when they decided to make Aliyah, they push it off. He's a doctor, physician. He had to pay off a lot of debt and everything. And the kids were in school, and then they got a little older. Tira's the oldest, so she just hit, she was, I think, in 12th grade. And they said, we just have, if we don't make Aliyah, if we don't do it now, it's just not going to happen. And all of his friends were saying, he's a doctor, it's not easy for a doctor to then, in the 1990s, to transfer, to come to Israel, the language barrier and your licenses. And they said, what are you going to do? And his answer was, mamash this. And I can't quote exactly, but this is what he said. He said, you know what? If I have to sweep the streets in Israel, that's what I'll do, because that's what I want to do. I want to move to Eretz Israel. So of course, when I heard that, I made a joke. I said, hey, I know it's not very easy to be a Oved Iriyah. And once you become an Oved Iriyah, you make a nice income, and you can't even get fired because, there's like this aguda, there's this, but that was a joke. But it just means that, it's a matter of faith, and it's hard. And that's what's happening now in Ezra and Nechemia's time. Nechemia realizes that we need to populate Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, inside the walls. And we're going to have to convince people. Nobody wants to give up their house and their 2 cars and their big backyard to live in this cooped up place, which is walled, which is nice, it's secure, but it's hard to leave at night, and you can't just go out whenever you want to. And also, there are also aspects of security, because now people are looking in at you, you become a target. So the people who now moved into the walled city needed to rearrange their social priorities as well, right? Obviously, they have to leave their friends and family behind, right? I mean, think about it. You're moving to a new area because we need to populate Yerushalayim, and it's hard to leave and disconnect from your friends and families. Also, something that I think is very, very hard for Olim Chadashim, something that we just need to remember. As much as I always, people know that already, I preach Aliyah, and I think it's important. I'm not afraid, and I have no fear. I think this is the only place that we all have to be. But we have to realize it's difficult. It's hard to make Aliyah. You're leaving sometimes family and friends, and there's medical issues, and there's work issues, cultural issues. It's not easy. I think it should be done, but maybe in stages. But at least it should be started. Somebody should start. If they didn't make Aliyah yet, then they should start making Aliyah. So that's important to note. So here, it's very similar. It's not like making Aliyah, but it also means leaving your friends and families. They also had to have a mind to endure the problems inside the city. They had a unique pioneer spirit, these guys. As we mentioned, it had been a ghost town for many, many years, and was now basically a slightly rebuilt, somewhat repopulated ghost town, right? But they're the ones who are now going to be in charge in building it. They have to work harder, and then which means they have to leave everything they built outside and work to build something inside. So the city didn't look all that glorious, and it needed a lot of work. So just think of how our beautiful Israel was built. We could walk around, and we do, Talbiya and Mekrefa'im and Moshava Germanit and Rachavia and Katamon. It's just so beautiful. It wasn't always this beautiful. We're lucky to live in an era, in a time where it's so beautiful. But we have to thank all those people who started from nothing. They're the ones who paved the streets. They're the ones who cleaned the streets. They're the ones who planted those beautiful trees that we have all over the place. And they start from nothing. That's what Nechemia is asking of these people. Leave your beautiful village homes with your beautiful land, and now come to Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, inside the walls, and start from the ground up. So that's also important to note. They also had to live knowing they were a target, as I mentioned before, because Sanballat and his people, Tuvia and Geshem, they didn't just give up. They didn't give up. Though there was now a strong wall to protect them, but since Yerushalayim was now a notable city with rebuilt walls, the fear was from a full-fledged attack by an army, and not just bands of robbers. Like up until now, it was just robbers, little small packets of people coming and maybe bothering you, but now, where it's a really big city, well, not big city, but it's got a wall around it, the only way people can get in is to come with an army. So it's also more dangerous. It's a little bit davar behipucho. We say that on the one hand, we built a city around Yerushalayim to protect it, and on the other hand, it becomes a target, and it was a target. We see that it's a target within our history. So that's important, very important to note. So that's basically Pasuk Aleph and Pasuk Bet. Pasuk Gimel, all the way to Pasuk Kaf Dalid, really the majority of the Perek, is basically a list of the families that settled in Yerushalayim that we just mentioned, right? And in this part, the main part of the chapter lists the families who moved in the inner parts of the walled city in Yerushalayim, and the list is arranged according to their status. And we're going to learn something very, very interesting about order when it comes to government, when it comes to, our government could definitely learn from this parak. Starting with the names of the tribes, we'll see in a minute, Yehuda and Binyamin, then going on to the Kohanim and the Leviim, the gatekeepers, etc. And the list basically lists the names of each of the households. Okay, so that's the first part. Well, the second part. The first part is, we said they have to make a raffle, a lottery. The second part is the names of the people who are moving into the city. And the third part is from Kaf Hey all the way to the end of the Perek, Pasuk Lamed Vav, another list of the neighborhoods outside of Yerushalayim that they were living as well. So alongside the endless list of names that we're going to see in a minute of those who volunteer also to live in Yerushalayim, the careful division into the various departments, they stand out, as we're going to see. And have this in your minds as we go through. This list is different from the previous one. It does not contain the names of households, the list of the places, of the areas. And it doesn't list the household of the families, only a list of the names of the neighborhoods in which Bnei Yehuda and Binyamin lived. And this division also very noticeable within each group, and especially amongst the Leviim, as we're going to see. So some of the Leviim, for instance, were in charge of the outer work outside of the Beit HaMikdash versus work that was done in the Beit HaMikdash. So let's just start reading a little bit, and we can understand really what's going on here. And it's important to go through it. So Pasuk Gimel, Ve'ele Rashi HaMedina Asher Yashvu B'Yerushalayim U'Be'arei Yehuda Yashvu Ish Ba'achuzato Be'arihem Yisrael HaKohanim Ve'aleviim Ve'anetinim U'Vnei Avdei Shlomo. U'B'Yerushalayim, now we're going to mention all those that are going to be inside Yerushalayim. Yashvu mi bnei Yehuda umi bnei Binyamin, because it was done across the globe. Why dafka bnei Yehuda u bnei Binyamin? Because that's the only people that are left. These are the two Shvatim, and Levi as well, Shevet Levi, which consists of the Levim and the Kohanim. We lost all the other Shvatim, right? That's way back in Sefer Melachim, when there was Galut Yisrael, Mamlechet Yisrael. Those who were with me in Sefer Melachim remember that. So we're left with Bnei Yehuda and Bnei Binyamin and the Leviim, which is basically the Kohanim and the Leviim. So Pasuk Dalid, U'Yerushalayim yashvu Bnei Yehuda and Bnei Binyamin. Mi Bnei Yehuda, there's a list of people: Ataya ben Uzziah, ben Zechariah, ben Amariah, ben Shvatya, ben Maalalel, mi Bnei Paretz, U'Maaseiah ben Baruch, ben Kol Chose, ben Chazaya, ben Adaya, Yoyari, ben Zechariah, ben Ashiloni, Kol Bnei Peretz hayashvim Yerushalayim. 468 אנשי חיל. We know exactly the numbers of people that actually lived in Yerushalayim. Now that was Bnei Binyamin, that was Bnei Yehuda. Bnei Binyamin, ואלה בני בנימין, סלו בן משולם בן יועד, בן פדיה, בן קוליה, בן מעשיה, בן איתיאל, בן ישעיה, ואחריו גבאי סלאי, 928. So that's the people that came from Shevet Binyamin. ויואל בן זכי פקיד עליהם. Yoel was in charge. He was the pakid, the secretary in charge of these people who are now moving in, helping them out, settle. ויהודה בן הסנואה על העיר משנה. And there was a sgan, a vice governor, right? That's even something. His name was Yehuda ben Senua. That was from Shevet Yehuda and Shevet Binyamin. So for these two Shvatim, there were two people in charge of their well-being to govern inside the city. The two mayors, the mayor and the vice mayor, the second in command. Now Mina Kohanim. Now let's talk about the Kohanim. ידעיה בן יויריב יכין, סריה בן חלקיה בן משולם בן צדוק בן מריות, בן אחיטוב נגיד בית האלוהים, ואחיהם עושי המלאכה לבית 822. There were 822 who were עושי מלאכה. They were in charge of the actual melacha upkeep going on in the Beit Mikdash area and around. ועדיה בן ירוחם בן פלליה בן אמצי בן זכריה בן פשחור בן מלכיה. More names, we'll see what they're in charge of. ואחיו ראשים לאבות 242, 242. More, ועמסי בן עזראל בן אחזי בן משילמות בן אימר, ואחיהם גיבורי חיל 128. גיבורי חיל. We had also people that were in charge. They were the strong Kohanim and Levi. They were important to be there. The strong men were there to protect. Upakid alihem, and on top of them, who was in charge of them, a guy called Zavdiel ben Hagedolim. So there's no such thing as no one is in charge. There's going to be a group of people. They have a job to do, and then on top of them, there's the boss. A boss makes sure that they do what they're supposed to be doing. There's a lot of order. So Bnei Yehuda and Bnei Binyamin, they were given a job to do. They now live in Yerushalayim, and they have someone on top of them, a leader to tell them what they can do, what they cannot do. Same way with the Kohanim. Umin Levim, the Levim are the same thing. Shmaya ben Chashuv, ben Azrika, ben Chashavya, ben Buni, v'Shabtai v'Yozavad al hamelacha hachitzona. Their defined position is they are in charge of the outer melacha, right? The outer melacha, which basically means the work outside of the Beit HaMikdash, in the area around, right? So that's important to note. We'll get back to that in a minute. Others from Yudzai, Pasuk Yudzai, Umatanya ben Micha ben Zavdi ben Asaf, Rosh HaTechila Yehode Latfila. Right, then we have people in Jerusalem. They lived mamash inside, and they were in charge of the prayer, the tefillah. Possibly singing in the tefillah. They were the mishorerim. They were no, not yet. Mishorerim are a bit later. In charge of the actual prayer. Uvakbukia mishne me'echa ve'avda ben Shamua ben Galal ben Yedutun. Kol haleviim ba'ir HaKodesh 284. 248 were inside, mamash inside Yerushalayim. Some of them were working outside of the Beit Mikdash, some of them inside, some of them were in charge of tefillah, etc. Now the shoarim, the Levim that are in charge of the gates, the doormen, the gates. Akuv talmon ve'achihem hashomrim b'she'arim 172. Make sure we have guards. Today you go into a mall, you have guards, making sure that you're not bringing something in that you shouldn't be bringing in, right? I don't think we're talking about the guards that are keeping the supermarkets, about making sure that you paid for what you bought, but rather security-wise, right? The Levim were also big people. Anshe giborei chayil. That's what it meant. And there are guards because they're in charge. They are in charge of the service. They're in charge of protecting Am Yisrael as well. Pasuk Kaf Aleph. Pasuk Kaf. Ush'ar Yisrael HaKohanim HaLevim b'chol Harei Yehuda ish benachalato. Everyone else that are not in Yerushalayim are outside, and they are busy doing their thing, etc. So let's continue 3 more psukim until the end of this part, like I said, which is talking about the jobs of the Yerushalmi inside Yerushalayim. Pasuk Kaf Bet, Ufkid HaLeviim b'Yerushalayim, the one in charge of all the Levim, right? We said there's somebody in charge of the Bnei Yehuda, Bnei Binyamin, in charge of the Kohanim. Now there's someone in charge of the Levim. His name is Uzi ben Bani ben Chashavya ben Matanya. Basically, Nechemia built for himself a government. Ben Micha, Mibnei Asaf, HaMeshorerim. So we also had Meshorerim. We know that every korban had to have music accompany the korban so that it can be accepted. And it was also beautiful music. I wish I could hear just a little bit the harmonies and the beautiful melodies of these unfortunately lost music that accompanied the korbanot that went all the way up to Shamayim. You know, we sing in shul, and a lot of us, some of us like it, some of us like it less, some of us like it more. Some of us like harmony, some of us don't necessarily like harmony or can harmonize, but either way, it's important to have music within our tefillot because it really is part of the neshama. Music is a language. It's a language of the heart, language of the neshama. And we had Meshorerim, we had Levim, that was their job to help us with this language of connecting to God through music, through the hargasha, through the emotion. Pasuk Kaf Gimel, Ki mitzvat hamelech alihem va'amana al hameshorerim devar yom biyomo. Right, at the end of the day, the supervision of the Levim was this guy Uzi. There were royal regulations as well, starting how these clans of Levim should take turns in leading the Beit HaMikdash. Not everybody could sing at the same time. You know, you have in a choir, you have those who have better voices, those who are second voices, but you also can't have that many people. So you have to switch every so often. And then Ptachya ben Meshezabel mibnei Zerach ben Yehuda liyad hamelech bechol devar ha'am. After that, Ptachya, the son of Meshezabel of the clan of Zerach, from Yehuda, from Shevet Yehuda, represented the people of Israel to the Persian courts. That was his job. Ad kan, the second part. So we're talking about gatekeepers, poets, doormans, guards, people who are in charge of the tefillah, people who are in charge of the beautiful poetry, the beautiful shirah and music in Yerushalayim. It must have been one really amazing a city to be in. And the reason is because Nechemia had to create a beautiful atmosphere, a beautiful place, because of everything that these people were giving up, as we mentioned before. Not easy. He wanted to create a stronghold, a beautiful place, an important stronghold for Am Yisrael. And the same is true for the Kohanim also. They had division from their duties. They were craftsmen, Giborei Chayil, strong men of valor, clerks who were in charge of them as well. Now this chalukah, this division that we saw, Yehuda, Binyamin, etc., it's not just a technical division. No, but really it's a proper administration. That's what it is, in which each of those doing the work was given a specific responsibility, specific function that they had to fulfill. They had to fulfill them with devotion, loyalty, and we're not allowed to deviate from them, because when you have a job to do, you do it well, and everyone does their job, and everyone does it well, that's harmony. It really does, and then things can actually work well. That is Nechemia. He's really the father of government within the Jewish nation. You don't see that, not like this anyway, in any reign of the Melachim. You have the Melech, you have the Sar Tzava, the Ramatkal, the chief of staff, and maybe the chief of staff has some sarim, but you don't really know how the government works. It's just the king and the Navi. The Navi possibly, connects him to God. We saw, though, there was, good kings and bad kings, but here you really see a government, mamash, right in front of our eyes, which basically are sarim, right? The Sar HaOtzar, Sar HaBitachon, and then you have the Pkidim. That's basically the Knesset, right? So much so that in the teaching of the Gemara, I'm going to show you something really amazing. In Arachin, in Masechet Arachin, Talmud Bavli, and Daf Yud Aleph Amud Bet, I'm going to share the Gemara with you because it's really amazing. It was said that, for instance, a poet, a Levi who was a poet, a Meshorer, who performed the job of a gatekeeper, For instance, he decided to take someone else's job, right? You're a mishorer. That's your job. That's your position. And if all of a sudden you say, look, I want to do something else, or I want to take someone else's responsibility. I want to do that too. I want to be a mishorer and I want to be a gatekeeper, right? That Levi received the death penalty. That's what the Gemara basically says. Did you believe it? I'm going to show you the Gemara. Couldn't believe it myself. Meaning, a Levi whose role was to be one of the poets, but who exceeded his authority and sought to trespass, on someone else's position or someone else's obligations and responsibilities, and took that person's job, like for instance, a guard's job, because he wanted to be a guard too, was punished. Mamash, punished. So I'm going to share my just so you can see. I was amazed by it. So this is from the Gemara in Arachin. I really took it from Rav Steinsaltz's Gemara. I'll make it a little bigger for everybody to see. Okay. And I just, I highlighted the Gemara in English that we want to read. I'm just going to read it in English just for the benefit of everyone here, but you can read it in Hebrew. I'll read it in Hebrew, right? Amar Abaye nakitinan meshorer, talking about the Levim, sheshi'er b'shel chaviro b'mita. Abaye said, we hold that a Levi designated to serve as a singer who instead served in another Levi's position as a gatekeeper is liable to be put to death. That's what the Gemara says. Now there's a whole debate, really, to be put to death. Isn't that a little harsh? So the Gemara at the end brings a Braita, another Mishnah that was not included in Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's book that he edited called the Mishnah, but it's just as powerful as a Mishnah, right? Just because of doubles and triples. So the Gemara raises this objection and says Abaye's statements from the Braita, really a singer who serves as a gatekeeper and a gatekeeper who sang are not punished with death. Rather, they have merely violated a prohibition. Okay, so it's not death, but it's a violation of a prohibition, which is a very severe thing. So we see that it was so important for Nechemia to make sure that everybody does their job. And if anybody who takes someone else's job, he's ruining the whole entire pyramid of success of the organization. So anybody who wants to see this Gemara, it's in Arachin, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Bet. You're more than happy to go there and to really see what it's about. So at first glance, like I said, it seems that this is way too heavy of a punishment, inappropriate for the nature of the offense, taking someone else's job. Oh, big deal. So I took his job. So I'm controlling more than I should. But an in-depth knowledge of proper government and division of powers show, it really does, that breaking boundaries and exceeding authorities and responsibilities, taking control of another person's job, can bring destruction to the entire organization. Everyone should stick to the job. And if you look at government, and if you look at what goes on, usually that's when things start crumble, when people want more than what they have on their plate, when they want to control more, when they want to take someone else's position, someone else's job. And that's the Gemara, black and white. And unfortunately, we find that in shuls as well, right? Someone decides to control all aspects and doesn't leave anything for anyone else. Shuls need people to take action and be part of the everyday administration. That's the Beit HaMikdash. A Beit Knesset is a mini Beit Mikdash. That's what Avodat HaKodesh is. Shul, Beit Mikdash, not a place where one goes to get served. You don't go into a shul because you want to be served by others. Rather, you go to be part of something much, much bigger, to give and to contribute. And that's what we see happens with what Nechemia is trying to build for Am Yisrael in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. He could have just done what other monarchs have done before him, what other dictatorships have done before him, other kings did before him. Appoint somebody to rule over everyone. That's what he could have done. He said, now you, Uzzah, you are now in charge. Whatever you say, you go. You tell everybody what they want to do. But that's not what Nechemia wanted. He wanted it to be part of the globe. He wanted everyone to have a position, everyone to do something, to feel part of Yerushalayim. And in a way, it's also what happened with the Tzionut in 1948, even before 1948, in the times of the Aliyah, people came and they worked together. That's the whole idea of a kibbutz. Okay, so they might have went a little bit too far in socialism, etc. But what they wanted to do is everyone has a job to do. Everyone works together, and together, look what they built. They built Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, V'Tiferet. And the second 1948 hit, and we had a government, and then all of a sudden people start fighting and wanting this control here, control there. What happened was this thing started to crumble. It's amazing how Nechemia basically put it together, mamash, 2,500 years ago. That's what Nechemia wanted. So in time, this tradition that he built was basically the basis for the prohibition of what we call deviation from responsibility and authority in Jewish law. Mishpat Ivri, it actually exists based on the Gemara that we saw. And according to that approach, which later became a cornerstone of contemporary administrative law, a person with authority and responsibility is forbidden to deviate from his position. And the deviation from his authority in itself may lead to the annulment of the act or decision made by this person, even if the result of this person's acts is good. And therefore, strict adherence to these rules will ensure proper administration, maintaining integrity and public trust in the government system. And that's really what works at the end of the day. And that's what Nechemia succeeded in doing. He built up Yerushalayim in a way that was never built before, because he gave it over to the people. He said, everyone should take a little position. Do this, you do this. You're going to be a gatekeeper. You're going to be the mishorer, the singer. You're going to be in the tefillah. You're going to help this, and you're going to take care of the economy. And that way, everyone works in a cohesive unit, and we can build. And I wish that's what would happen in shuls, our shul as well, that we all take part and do something positive. You go and you say, I want to lend a hand. I want to do A. I want to give. I want to contribute, instead of just taking. Coming to shul and say, I want to be served. That doesn't work. It doesn't work, because then the kedusha of the makom serves you instead of you serving the kedusha. We called it Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. That's what we called it. So let's continue. So that was the second part. The third part is basically all the areas of Yerushalayim that were populated outside of Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. So let's read pasuk kaf hey. Ve'el hachatzerim bisdotam ibnei Yehuda ישבו בקריית הארבע ובנותיה ובדיבון ובנותיה ובקבצאל וחצריה. They went to all these places. חצרים, we still have that today. קריית ארבע, we have that today. דיבון, בישוע, פסוק כ"ו, ומולדה, ובבית פלט, ובחצר שועל, ובבאר שבע, ובנותיה, all the way back to Avraham Avinu, it still exists. ובציקלג, that was one of the places those who learned Shmuel with me could remember what happened in Tziklag with David HaMelech and Amalek. Uvi Mechona, Uvi Vinoteya, Pasuk Kaftet, Ube'en Rimon, Ube Tzorah, that's all the way down south. Those who know Tzorah, place down south. Ube Yarmut. Some of these places don't exist anymore. We don't know where they are. Maybe archaeologically they do, but some of these actually still exist today. Zanoach, Adulam, Vachatzarihem, Lachish. Maybe not the same place. We're really seeing. I didn't bring a map because it's just a chaval. Maybe next week I'll bring a map of really all these places where. I just want to bring the last psukim so we could finish today's parak. I promised that we'll finish a little early today. Uvnei Binyamin Migava, Geva Binyamin. Those who know where Geva Binyamin is, it's by the Pisgat Ze'ev area. Michmash. There's a yeshuv called Ma'ale Michmash, Ve'aya Uveit El Uvnoteya. Anatot also exists in that area by Pisgat Ze'ev. Adam, those who know the area. Nov, it's not the same Nov. There's a place called Nov in Golan. We don't know where the Nov is here. Ananya, Chatzor, Rama, Gitaim, Chadid, Tziv'oim, Nevalat, Lod, Ve'ono, Geach HaRashim, Umin Halviim, Machlekot, Yehuda, Levinyamin. At the end of the day, all these places were populated by all these people. You had also from Yehuda, also from Binyamin, and from the Leviim. So basically, Nechemia built himself an amazing Medina, a nation within the empire, the Persian Empire. So he was a leader. We had a spiritual leader called Ezra. We had Sari, we had ministers who were in charge of their jobs. We had people in charge of the gates. We had people in charge of the economy. We had people in charge of the tefillah and the korbanot. We had the kohanim, and we had people in charge of every little possible thing. And he made sure that it worked in one cohesive unit. And he built something that, unfortunately, after he passed away, we'll see that a little later on, things start to deteriorate, and we never really had such a organized government the way he built it in Yerushalayim. Tov, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will continue Bli Neder next week. We are really closing the Sefer. Next week, we're going to see the lists of all the Kohanim and the Leviim, the heads of the Kohanim, the heads of the Leviim, and then we're going to, like I mentioned before, after that, we're going to go on to Nechemia's memoirs and what he finally did, and we'll have a Chanukah, the celebration of the Chomat Yerushalayim, kind of like the celebration of government, Yerushalayim, and back to a Medina within a Medina. So Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope to see everyone there. Enjoy your week, Shavua Tov, and be well, everyone. Refuah Shlema to the Cholim and to the Psuim as well, and we should have a wonderful week.